Welcome back to the channel. Everyone, if you love spine-chilling tales and the kind of stories that make you question reality, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into 5 terrifying horror stories and real-life incidents shared on the internet that will keep you on the edge of your seat. These stories range from eerie encounters to unexplainable events that have left people questioning what they truly saw. So, grab your favorite drink, sit back, and prepare yourself for a roller coaster ride through the most unsettling tales the web has to offer. Let's get started with number 1. The dark web, a hidden layer of the internet that most people never access. Stories about it are shrouded in mystery and terror, a place where anything and everything illegal thrives in the shadows. While many of these tales seem like urban legends, some of them are chillingly real. This is the story of how my innocent curiosity as a 17-year-old led me down a horrifying path into the dark web, a place where I witnessed things that I wish I could erase from my memory. Consider this a warning. Some things are better left unknown. It all started with my love for horror stories. I was 17 and, like most teens, I spent a lot of time on YouTube. I loved watching creepy videos and horror stories, especially those about the dark web. These stories often involve people stumbling into terrifying situations, stalkers, hackers, or worse. I didn't really believe them. To me, they were just entertainment, exaggerated for clicks. One night, curiosity got the best of me. I decided I wanted to see the dark web for myself. I had heard about the Tor browser, the tool that grants access to the hidden layers of the internet. It seemed simple enough to download, and before I knew it, I was exploring this infamous digital underworld. At first, it was exactly what I expected. There were forums and marketplaces selling illegal things, drugs, weapons, counterfeit money, and even human organs. It was disturbing, yes, but it felt distant. I wasn't involved. I was just an observer. I kept clicking through various links, going deeper and deeper. Time slipped away. What I thought was just an hour turned out to be hours. It was 1 a.m. before I realized how late it had gotten. But my curiosity was stronger than my better judgment. Then I clicked on a link that I will never forget. The site had a red theme and a sinister vibe, with no description or warnings. The moment it loaded, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't like the other sites I visited. What I saw was horrifying beyond words. It was a gallery of videos and images of people being tortured, murdered, and worse. These weren't low-quality, grainy clips. They were clear, painfully clear. The first video I watched showed 2 young women, no older than their early 20s, tied up in the middle of a forest. At first, they were making noisy, laughing or crying. It was hard to tell. Then, a man walked into the frame with a pistol. Without hesitation, he shot them both in the head. It was over in seconds. The video ended abruptly, but the image of their lifeless bodies was burned into my mind. I felt sick. My stomach churned and my hands shook. But for some reason, I didn't stop there. My curiosity turned into a morbid fascination. I clicked on another video. This one was even worse. It showed a woman tied to a tree in a forest. 2 men approached her, laughing as they beat her with machetes. She couldn't scream. Her mouth was gagged. They didn't stop until they started cutting her throat. I couldn't look away, even as my mind screamed at me to close the browser. Another video showed a woman sitting in a chair, her hands bound. She was sobbing, staring directly into the camera. Suddenly, a man appeared with a rifle and shot her in the head. The screen went black. Each video was worse than the last, each more disturbing. These weren't fake. They weren't staged. They were real. And the clarity of the footage made it impossible to deny. Finally, I snapped out of it. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart racing, my mind reeling. I uninstalled the Tor browser immediately. I changed my desktop wallpaper to something religious, hoping it would cleanse the evil I had just witnessed. And then I prayed. I prayed harder than I ever had in my life. I prayed for the victims, for myself, and for the world. That night, I couldn't sleep. The images replayed in my mind over and over. I was drenched in sweat, shaking with fear and disgust. For days after, I couldn't think about anything else. Those faces haunted me. Those screams echoed in my mind. I prayed every day, asking for forgiveness, for peace, for the strength to forget. Slowly, the memories started to fade, but they have never disappeared completely. Even now, years later, I still think about what I saw. I wonder who those people were. What led them to such a horrifying fate? Were they innocent, or had they somehow crossed the wrong people? I will never know. But what I do know is this. The dark web is no place for curiosity. If you are thinking about exploring it, I am begging you don't. Some things are not meant to be seen. Some doors should never be opened. The things I saw are not just stories. They are real. The dark web is a place of unimaginable darkness, where humanity's worst impulses thrive. And for what? For money? For power? Whatever the reason, it's not worth the cost. If there is one thing I have learned from this experience, life is precious. Never take it for granted. Be kind to others. Avoid unnecessary fights. And most importantly, never let curiosity lead you into darkness. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay safe, and remember, some things are better left unseen. Story number 2. Home Sweet Home. The house stood crooked at the end of the street, right next to the freeway. Its white and brown paint was cracked, peeling off in large flakes that revealed years of neglect. It was a sight no one would envy, yet it was ours for now. The owner, a woman named Ross, stood out front, nervously twisting a rusty key between her fingers. She wore a navy blue dress and black flats that seemed as worn as the house itself. Her crooked smile revealed a few missing teeth, but she spoke warmly despite her appearance. "Welcome, family. I know you don't know much English, but tell your mama and papa I cleaned as much as possible after the last tenants. I'll let you settle in. I'll be in the front with my brother, Louis, if you need me." I nodded, trying to match her grin, and led my family into the house. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of old wood and mold. The walls were cracked, and the floor creaked under every step. It wasn't much, but it was what we could afford. Cheap, discreet. After everything we'd endured in our home country, fleeing from people who wanted us dead, this place felt like a step up. Months passed, and life settled into a strange routine. I found a job at a local diner that was as run down as our new home. It wasn't busy, but it paid enough to keep us afloat. My mama and papa, who didn't know much English, managed to get work at a clothing factory. Their long hours left me to handle most things around the house. Occasionally, I visited Ross in the front house. Louis rarely left his room. I'd heard whispers from Ross about his time in the war, about how it had broken him, leaving him bedridden and silent. Yet, whenever I visited, his gaze would follow me, sharp, unrelenting, almost as if he was studying me. "You know," Ross said one evening as she fluffed Louis's pillow, "I appreciate you visiting. We don't have much family, and it gets lonely. You're a good girl." I smiled, though Louis's intense stare made my skin crawl. "Well, I should get going. Mama and Papa will be home soon, and I need to prepare dinner." As I grabbed my purse, my notepad slipped out and landed on the floor. Ross bent down to pick it up. Her hands trembled as she glanced at the page. My list of groceries. "Oh, thank you, Ross," I said, snatching the notepad from her hands. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together, as if she'd seen something she couldn't explain. "Are you okay?" I asked. She nodded quickly, but something in her eyes told me she wasn't. That evening, I cooked roasted beef soup spiced to perfection, a rare comfort for my exhausted parents. We sat together at the old wooden table I bought from a neighbor's yard sale. Just as we were finishing our meal, there was a loud, frantic knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Louis standing there, his frail body trembling, his face contorted with rage. "You!" he shouted, his voice hoarse and filled with fury. "It was you!" He stumbled forward, and my parents rushed to support him. "Mr. Lewis," I said softly, "where's Ross? You shouldn't be out of bed. You'll catch a cold." Before I could get any closer, pain shot through my abdomen. I looked down to see a blade in his hands, the blood already staining my clothes. "You killed her," Lewis screamed, his voice cracking. "You killed and ate my sister, you demon." I fell to my knees, gripping the wound as hot tears streamed down my face. My parents stared at me, their expressions unreadable. My sobs quickly turned into an eerie laugh. "Oh, Mr. Lewis," I said, my voice slurred, "you've been so kind to us. I didn't want it to come to this." Lewis's eyes widened, and before he could respond, my parents moved in. They worked together seamlessly, as if rehearsed, and within moments, Lewis lay motionless on the floor. Blood splattered the walls and soaked into the carpet. I struggled to my feet, wiping the blood from my face. My mama handed me a bowl of soup, her voice trembling. "Eat now. You will heal soon." Papa leaned in close, his hand gently brushing a stray drop of blood from my cheek. "No one can take our home from us anymore," he said with a small, satisfied grin. "This is our home now." I sipped the soup, feeling the warmth spread through my body. The wound in my abdomen began to close, the pain subsiding with every swallow. We've always done what was necessary to survive. It's not our fault the world doesn't accept us. We're not so different from anyone else. We want what everyone wants: a home, a family, peace. And if that means assimilating into this new life, so be it. No one will take this home from us. Not now. Not ever. Story number 3. At the bottom of a well. The light from above shone like a moon on a dark night, prepared for a howling retribution that never came. But instead it was silent. A suited corpse laid in its stunning and decayed conclusion, its boils festering and menstruating from any cavity they could barely escape from. The wetness has warped its skin to resemble that of one aged, perhaps 89, give or take. The sullen face hovering over what could be assumed a pool of its own tears, if it wasn't for the lesions and contortions. A boil the size of a clenched fist burst near its spine, breaking the silence like a pin drop. If conscious, the pain would have been immeasurable. A stream of pus seeped into the darkness of its bath, creaming over lofted waters, mixed with blood and sinew. The body was that of an empty name, an even more empty vessel. It was tossed aside like a sickness. The clear purple eyes that looked on at its surroundings would see nothing but darkness. Its gaze would have been disrupted by a pulsating sty that hugged its cornea. An occasional slap to hydrate the walls and skin could be felt. An occasional sip into the lungs would be breathed. Its skull had been smashed in with a blunt force, not before its venture into the tunnel, but on its way. Teeth scattered to the waves like pebbles along the ocean. Bones cracked like twigs, prepared to burn for all eternity. Its face bloated like a clueless baby's photograph. It lies there in an uncomfortable purgatory, after years of vacant-minded gambling with one's sense of self, making the wrong associates. Its weary head was finally lost in the wrong crowd. 3 poker chips and a half-full packet of cheap cigarettes waddled in the waves, purging themselves from the pockets of the cheap gray, brandless suit. A rusted pocket knife stuffed away was left useless to protect it. A wallet with a smiling face and $48 held the forgotten name, Jeremy Clark. It waited in the water, cold, bloated, and slowly returning to the ether. A splash broke the anticipation, a hair away from its now molted scalp. If it could see, it would be that of a wooden bucket, slightly decayed from years of use, loose nails and metal entwined like consoling lovers. It descended from above like a savior from the heavens. It met the corpse's eye with an unusual grace, floating as if waiting for its appreciation, like visiting a commonly seen friend. They would exchange smiles and exasperated conversations. If they were still alive, they would talk about their families, their goals, failures, and laugh about their regretful, mischievous adulteries. They would embrace before a heartfelt farewell, tears in their eyes as they said they were thankful for each other's company. A couple of minutes passed a vague conversation that echoed a whisper its way down the tight vertical corridor. Talks of who was going to water fields. The yaps of an excited dog. Childish protests of denial on whose turn it was. How thirsty they were. Pa! Charlie just tucked tail and took off down the prairie. That stinking old dog ain't right in his mind. A disgruntled old man eclipsed the moonlight from the mouth of the cavern, gazing down, unaware of the bloated carcass below. He grabs the twine that held the bowl between both worlds, looking back in a multitasked annoyance. Christian, I told you to get that mutt on a tight leash. He's gonna go get himself in a world of trouble. Boy, I oughta dash. The echoes trailed off the ripples as his voice became that of inward acceptance. He strangled the rope as macabre thoughts swelled around his mind, pulling one hand at a time. About his stresses out in the fields, about his good-for-nothing son disobeys his means, how he's getting older and never got to follow his hopes and dreams, how his wife grew wrinkled and unattractive, and how he only stayed until the kids grew up, about how it could be satiated with just a sip of nice, cold water. Slowly, while half full and tired of this unfortunate meeting, it made its ascension and bade its farewells until the next time. With each tug, it bobbles and weaves, spilling tiny drops from its head. The ascent feels like hours, maybe even days if time mattered. Tears of melancholy would flee the corpse's unrecognizable expression, wishing it could have spent more time with its only friend. It was here for months of repetition, enough of a time to forget who one is if left alone to their own devices. It would be long enough for one to call it home. It swam without making a stroke, floating in its failure. It stayed here till its flesh melted away, leaving only the internal remains of an unknown being. Broken, battered, bruised, and brimmed with boils, it found its burial in the bottom of the well. Story 4. The small cabin sat in the heart of the northern Michigan woods, isolated and quiet, blanketed in snow. The fire crackled in the corner, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. The character was reading a book, glancing up from it and noticing something on the window. A handprint, small, just visible in the condensation. That wasn't there before. Later, the character lay in bed, trying to sleep. The wind howled outside. Then, a faint tapping began. It was soft, almost rhythmic, echoing through the walls. The character turned over in bed, listening intently. The tapping stopped as soon as they focused on it. The next day, the character hiked through the snow, following a trail behind the cabin. The woods were eerily quiet. After a while, they came upon a small clearing. A wooden chair sat alone in the center of the clearing, weathered by time and facing the path the character had just come from. Who would leave a chair out here like this? Uneasy, the character continued on, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Later that night, the tapping began again, louder now, echoing from one wall to another as if something or someone was circling the house. The character hurriedly checked all doors and windows. Everything's locked. The snow's untouched. I'm just imagining things. The character returned to their bedroom. They froze as they looked at the window above their bed. There on the glass was another handprint, larger this time, the fingers impossibly long, stretched down the glass. No! No! This can't be happening. The power went out. The cabin was plunged into complete darkness, only the pale moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. The silence was thick and unnerving. The character held a flashlight, tense, listening. Suddenly, the sound of scratching filled the air, slow, deliberate, moving from the front door to the window, then to the walls. Then a voice, faint but clear, whispered from the darkness, "Let me in." The character stood frozen, clutching the flashlight. The voice came again, louder and closer. Let me in. I'm cold. Story number 5. Demon in the Stream. I, 23F, used to have a real addiction to watching content on streaming platforms. This was because it was semester break, and most of my friends from university had traveled overseas for their break. I could not afford that luxury of seeing the world. So instead, I would browse trending streams from the comfort of my small apartment. There was one night, however, I came across an unusual stream. The title read, Streaming for 10 Days Without Sleeping. Curious at how someone could physically do this, I started watching. The streamer, who had short, brown hair with dark eyes, sat at his desk in what appeared to be his bedroom. He must have had a bad web camera, as his footage was grainy. A slow hum could be heard in the background. The broadcast started a day ago, so the streamer was still quite engaged with the online chat. Hello, everyone. For those who are just joining, as you can see from the title, I am trying to stay awake for 10 days straight. Checking the viewer count, I saw there were only about 50 people watching the stream. I stuck around for a few minutes, then decided to watch something else. Later, I messaged my friend, Rebecca, about the stream. We both studied the same degree, psychology, and had just finished our first year. She, however, was back home with her family in the States. We talked about how it must be impossible to stay awake for 10 days straight. 2 days later, and I had completely forgotten about the stream. It was only until I was on the Explore page again that I saw his stream. Again, I was curious, so I started watching. It was very different this time. Standing up with his head down, the streamer was getting gently pushed back and forward between 2 other people. I assumed this was to keep him from falling asleep. His body was limp and lifeless, like a puppet that was no longer being held up. They were whispering something, as if they didn't want the audience to hear what was being said. The usual hum was in the background, but this time there was a click, 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 then a pause. Then the clicking would start again. Between the clicks and the streamer's motionless body, being gently pushed back and forward, I decided to stop watching. Something didn't feel right. 3 more days passed, and again, I found myself lying on my bed, looking for something to watch. I found the same stream this time, however, it was titled, Help Me. I've streamed for 7 days straight. I clicked on the stream without thinking. This time, the streamer stood by himself, head bent forward, looking to the ground. He swayed slowly. There was no clicking, but I could hear the blowing of wind. Before I could leave, I received a message from Rebecca. I replied to what she had said, and I also mentioned how weird the stream was getting. She agreed it was weird, and after a bit of back and forth, she announced she would have to go to bed. I wished her good night. I clicked over back to the tab. The tab opened, and there I saw him. The streamer was at his desk again, but this time, he was looking directly into the camera. His face was pale, and his eyes were red. 2 bags underlined his eyes. Slowly, the corners of his lips raised into a wide grin. "Hello, Jane, how are you?" he croaked. This made no sense. How could he know? My username didn't have Jane in it. I paused. I didn't know what to do. "Don't you want to chat?" he whispered, still with that unsettling smile. "How do you know who I am?" I wrote in the chat box. His eyes flickered to the left, reading the message, then looked straight ahead. "I think we just share a connection. There's something about you. Was anyone else seeing this?" I looked over to the viewer count and only saw the number 1. "I'm going to call the police. Tell me why you know my name." Again, his eyes looked over to the left, then straight. "I think you should come here so I can tell you more. It'll be easier." "I'm never doing that." Suddenly, his eyes twitched. He still smiled. "You don't have a choice." I closed the tab, horrified of what I witnessed. It was a while before I could get to sleep that night. My brain was in overdrive. How did he know me? The rain gently landing on my window didn't help my uneasiness. It was a long time before I fell asleep. The next day, I was determined to go to the police and report him, but I needed more evidence. Maybe I could get a recording of him explaining how he got my name. That'll give the police more information to work with. With my laptop in hand, I moved to the dining room in my apartment. Opening the streaming platform, I searched for his stream intentionally for the first time. The title read, "Help Me. I've streamed for 8 days straight." Taking a breath in, I opened the stream. He was at his desk still, looking at his second monitor. He immediately snapped to look straight at the camera, again with that horrible smile. "Hello, Jane." My fingers wouldn't move. It felt like he was looking straight through my soul. Finally, I typed in chat, "How do you know me?" Again, his eyes darted to the left, then looked straight at me. "You know how to find out. Come here." He leaned closer to the monitor. "This is it, final warning. Tell me what you know or I go to the police." I pretended to be brave. Suddenly, his smile vanished. "You won't be able to." I had had enough. I closed my laptop in an instant, only to reveal the same face looking at me in my dining room. This time, he was smiling again. And that wraps up today's collection of spine-chilling horror stories and terrifying real-life incidents. What do you think? Which one sent shivers down your spine? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've got any creepy stories of your own, feel free to share them with us. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and make sure to subscribe for more dark and twisted tales from the internet. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe out there. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows.